Alafia, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of Yaounde Presents the H3O Art of Life show. I'm without my introductory theme song and I feel a little lost, but I'm not lost for long because I have a very good guest with me, Dr. Yaounde Olu. And we're going to discuss the art of intelligence. As an opening statement, I would just like to say that most people think that intelligence is acquired through the use of study of books written mostly by other people. But of course, that is not the case, and not entirely the case at any rate. And so I thought we would look at some of the things that I know that Dr. Olu has done. I know that she looks at the stars quite a bit, and she has a lot of expertise that comes as a result of years and years of study before and I put that before all of the things she did to acquire her PhD. So I'd like to greet you, Dr. Olu.
Oh, I am so happy to be here
I am
today.
very happy to be here. You know, the stars aligned and all the planets and everything else to make sure that we had a chance to have this conversation. My introduction to you came through my familiarity with Osun Gallery, which you had in Chicago on the South Side. And you had a very interesting window treatment, and it would attract attention while at the same time making one wonder what was going on behind those treatments. So tell me about your life and how you got started and where you are now. I know there's a lot to cover, but we can do it.
Oh, yes, there's always a lot to cover, but you mentioned the gallery. That was one of the best experiences of my life. I operated the gallery from 1968 to 1982. And during that time, I had an opportunity to meet just about every artist, writer, thinker, around, especially in Chicago. But actually, there were times when people traveled from other places to actually come to the gallery, and I didn't realize that until someone told me that later. But it was a very special period because I was able to come in contact with people who had all types of knowledge, who did all types of research. And certainly that influenced me in my life. Now, I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, whether or not it was my idea to have the gallery and have people come, or that, that, well, let me just say this. We were talking about the art of intelligence. There was something innate in me that led me to do that, which brought me in contact with all types of wonderful people, yourself included. But I met just about everybody. I mean, just so many stellar people. I'm afraid now to start mentioning names because I'm certainly certain I will forget some of them. But that was a very special period in my life. During the course of those years, we had all types of art shows. We had book discussions. We had concerts. AACM had a lot of their early concerts right there at Oshun. So you could come there and see Edward Wilkerson, and you could see Ari Brown and Avriel Ra, and Yosef Ben Israel. Just a lot of people would come through there. Kaylon Phil Coran came through there and did a production. Henry Threadgill. So it was just a wonderful time of coming in contact with all kinds of people, and that inspired me. And certainly, I'm certain. Well, I hope rather that I did inspire them as well.
Well, I do remember the Oshun Gallery, and I remember also that among other things that you did was that you did charts. And as a matter of fact, I should compliment you because you did a chart for my daughter, among others, my youngest daughter.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it was prophetic in that you talked about the things that would benefit her. You talked about the things that she was likely to encounter. And, I guess you would call that her nativity chart. What do you call those when you do that?
The natal chart.
The
I
natal
usually
chart.
do the natal chart, the progress chart. The natal chart is the chart done for the exact moment of birth. The progress chart is done on top of that because certainly as we grow and change, we unfold, not unlike a rose. And so a chart gives us a snapshot of moments in time when that unfoldment occurs. So I do a natal chart, progress chart, and transit chart.
Do you still do those things?
Oh yes, I'm still very, very, very much involved in that. Yes, very, very much involved. I that has also been one of the most profound introduction to the other kinds of sciences that I've experienced. I started life as, well, I can't say I started life, but my professional life, I was a public school teacher for many years, a certified public school teacher with the Chicago Public Schools. And I was a science teacher. And I've taught science, and then I've taught in private schools. I've taught in a number of different places. And initially, I didn't know anything about astrology per se. I was just always a researcher, always looking for the answers to life and living it. And I was forced into astrology serendipitously, so to speak. I was a public school teacher and I was out. I had to take a couple of sick days. And during the period of taking those sick days, I've always had a lot of books. I have a huge library. Nothing was of interest to me during that 2-day period but this one astrology book that someone had given me a couple of days prior. I really wasn't focused on it or anything. I was, under the weather, so to speak. And everything that I looked at, nothing caught my interest. I didn't want to watch television. But this astrology book was right there. And by the end of that second day, I had completed that entire book and became extremely well and was back at work the next day. And from that point on, I began studying astrology in earnest. And it was very eye-opening to me, very eye-opening. And I was, since that time, I've been able to do a lot of research and I've developed my own techniques. And I've made some actual discoveries about astrology and the sea of mind in which we reside. Because basically what happens with astrology is not that the stars cause things to happen per se. It's like looking at a clock. When you see a clock and it's, we don't look at clocks with hands too much these days. We look at the digital clock. But the bottom line is that when you look at a so-called astrological chart, you're looking at the configuration of space-time, and certain things happen when things are in a certain relationship one to another. But the other important thing that I want to point out is that astrology is not just about what's happening in the sky. It's about you and I having conversations. It's about people who pass through our lives. In other words, we live and reside in a sea of mind. And so everything that comes in contact with us on a day-to-day basis has a message, or there's no such thing as randomness. They're there because we are traveling these psychological tracks or these psychic tracks. So when I do a chart, it's basically a picture of the way people think based on the patterns that are in the sky. And I know a lot of people think that astrology is not real, but I can tell you, based on my years of experience, that it is absolutely real. It has great import in what happens every day to all of us. So whether people believe it or not, it's there. But I do say this, that there's a point that we should reach as human beings where we're not responding just to our innate impulses and what have you, and that we develop the consciousness to such an extent that we break away from any astrological influences. So I don't think that astrology controls us, so to speak. I think it provides us with a really good tool for observing the book of life in its flow on a day-to-day basis. But I'm not the type of astrologer who will tell you this will happen to you tomorrow. I do not say that I tell the future. I do believe that character is destiny, and your future will be written by your actions today. That's my take on that.
I am in total agreement with that. I really feel that the lives that we're living now are lives that we have already written. You know, there's a book called You Are the Author of Your Own Experience, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I think that to a great extent, you know, that theory or that thesis has credibility because you know, you can take it to the scriptures if you want to and say you reap what you sow, but you are sowing as you are living, as you are making choices and decisions, and those things that you are sowing will bear fruit in your life, either in this incarnation or at some other time. Of course, that's another thing that, you know, people have to decide whether they like or not like. But the point is that, you know, you will see the consequences of your actions and of your choices and decisions that belong to you. You own them.
Oh,
And
yes.
so you have to be very, very careful about the things that you do and say and think. And it's the most difficult thing, at least in my case, is for the things you think. I sit down and meditate, and my mind goes in the gym, and it decides that it's just going to try it's going to do the dumbbells, and it's going to run on the treadmill, it's going to ride the bicycle, and it's quieting one's mind so that you can get above this plane of turbulence where you can be calm enough to get into another zone or sphere is a very difficult thing, and it requires continuous practice, and it requires that you devote time to it.
I agree. I've always said the earth is a schoolroom. It really is. And from day to day, we have an opportunity to learn our lessons. And if we don't learn them well, for every cause there is an effect. Whatever causes we put out there will come back to us. And a lot of people don't believe that because sometimes the causes don't come back that quickly. And you did mention reincarnation, and I have to say that I'm definitely a proponent of that concept. I believe that reincarnation is a fact. And otherwise, there would be no, it wouldn't make sense with some of the senseless things that happen to people today, some of the, you know, senseless crimes that occur and whatever. But yes, we are creating our lives from moment to moment. We are creating our future. So what a chart can do is tell you what your patterns have been, what your habits have been. So in that regard, an astrologer can look at a chart and see what the tendencies are, and based on your previous activities and based on your tendencies, you can make predictions about what may occur. Basically, we're talking about probabilities, not as opposed to predictions. But the thing is, if you become an enlightened person, then, and you understand how you create your future, if you understand that you have made mistakes in the past and that you want to correct those mistakes and thereby creating new causes, then an astrologer can't tell you what's going to happen other than that you may go in a certain direction that may be very positive. You can read the positive side. But we create our own lives from moment to moment.
Right, and you know, the behavior that you persist in, you know, and this is, I know that you're a scientist, and we're both educators. You're a scientist, and I was an English teacher, so I'm with language, and you're with science, which does not mean that it excludes it, but it just shows that our focus has been different. But you know, it's things that I read also lead me to think that you actually create tracks, grooves, indentations in your brain that prevent you after a time from being able not to follow a certain path. You know, if you just persist, an addiction, I think, is probably akin to that. That you start using drugs or you start doing something, especially something negative, and then you can't seem to stop yourself from doing it. People can't seem to prevent themselves from smoking or drinking or doing things that they know are detrimental to them because they have made these maps in their minds that just predispose them to behave in particular ways. And if they don't take the time to try to create some new grooves, then they will be the slave of the patterns they have created.
That's so true. In fact, the whole notion of being in a rut, you are actually in a rut psychologically, organically, and with your brain. So that is true. But I think that if there's something that people don't talk about a lot, and I think that what's missing is that if your intent is to be a decent person, if you are attempting to rise in consciousness, then, and if you have faith, and if you believe in the Creator, whatever name you want to give that Creator, but if you believe in a Creator, things that happen to you will happen to you with a certain amount of grace, and you will be able to move beyond. And I think that's even true with karma, the actions that come back to you. If you, for example, have done something that you know you should not have done, and you show true remorse, in fact, you experience it viscerally, then and you pray, you know, to whomever you want to pray, then you can reach a point where you're on a different frequency and wavelength. And so I think that's what grace is, because once you've risen to a different level, then whatever it was that you did, if it was on this level, it comes back there, but you're not there. You're somewhere else.
Right.
So
grace mitigates the consequences of our actions, and it's just wonderful that the Creator has that as a part of the creation, that it is not tit for tat. You know, I love vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because I am very pleased to have vengeance in the hand of a power that is merciful and that provides grace, because I know that I may have some acquaintances that would not be merciful or provide any grace if any affront was done to them. So it's excellent that you brought out the point that you know, that there is mercy and grace in the universe, that that is sometimes the consequence that we deserve is mitigated. It's a slap on the wrist rather than a fist to the face.
right, and this is very real, and a lot of times people don't understand this in the real sense that our behavior is imprinted. There's nothing that's ever lost because since we reside in a sea of mind, when I'm saying that, I mean right now we're immersed in intelligence that is all around us, that's omnipresent. And if we choose to be on a particular frequency, then we will get things that are on that frequency. We won't get the things that are on another frequency. And that is one of the main reasons that your character, being pure of character as much as possible, is important. And we don't talk about that a lot. We talk about all kinds of other things, learning, and don't get me wrong, as a lifelong educator, I do believe in learning. But at the same time, I believe that your heart, what you say in your heart, what you do, is very, very important. You can be the brightest genius in the world, but if you don't have the sense to know that the way you treat your fellow human beings is a different kind of an different kind of intelligence, but just as important, then you are a boo-boo the fool, so to speak.
I understand that because the in Kemet, of what people call Egypt, our ancient ancestors had the concept of heart mind. You know, the heart and the mind operated together.
Yes.
You could not make cold, rational decisions devoid of the influence of the heart.
Right.
And so the fact that we're now in a culture where so-called practical or rational decisions are made. You know, if it can be done, do it. If you desire to do it and no one can stop you, do it. You know, without and I'm also told the same thing about the indigenous people that are erroneously called the Native Americans, that they and African people also talked about decisions that you make affecting several generations down the line, that you are not an individual. And when you talk about we're in a sea of intelligence, how do you separate yourself from the sea of intelligence that is omnipresent and decide that you can be an individual and you can make decisions in your own self-interest without regard to anyone else in this same environment?
That is so profound. I was just reading a book earlier today, and this book was written, I won't mention the author's name, but this person was a channeler and supposedly was channeling people who were in contact with people in other cultures off planet. And one of the things that was pointed out was that when people came, that some of these off-planet entities came to Earth and actually helped found Atlantis, or whatever we call those earlier civilizations. But that what happened with Machu Picchu and some of those other places was that they knew that their intelligence was connected together. So at a certain point, they all ascended and they had no longer any use for their physical bodies because they had risen in intelligence to another level. But the key, the operative point there was that everyone had to go together. They had to have consent. They had to all be of a similar mind. Everyone understood that what one did was definitely connected with everyone else. And that's true right now today. We have no sense of that. One of the saddest things that I experience periodically is reading the comments on the internet when people are commenting about stories that whatever it is. But there's so much hatred out there, so much people do not believe that they're connected, that we're all connected, even though we are stuck together on this little blue-green ball, rotating in space. But that is so true, and this is also true of the African American community. Our problems would change overnight if we understood the power that we have collectively. If we understood that I am my brother and sister's keeper,
absolutely,
it would change overnight. We would not have economic problems. We would, our stress levels would go down. We would just have a whole different experience if we could just understand that little thing. And this is not something that has not been talked about forever. It's just that I guess going back to the notion of intelligence, you have to have the experience of something in order to really know that it is real, know that it is true. Which brings, I was thinking the other day about the notion of so-called parallel universes. When I think about parallel universes, I think about the people that I come in contact with, because the world is really not one big thing. What happens is that we take our world and we mesh with other people's worlds. So your universe is slightly different from my universe. So these are parallel universes. And what's real in my universe may not be real in your universe. But what's real in all of them is that we are all connected. And we really need to understand that.
That is just such an important point. Martin Luther King said, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And if we ought to be enlightened, then I cannot be enlightened all by myself as an individual. I must in some ways not only seek it for myself, but I must seek it for you. I must persuade you to seek it for yourself so that we can all rise together.
Right. You've heard the saying, we're only as strong as the weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
mm-hmm.
real. That's
mm-hmm.
real. We can't separate ourselves from what's happening in the communities, no matter how. I mean, some people become extremely wealthy and they think that those people there are. It's not that.
Absolutely.
It's not that. And we have to really develop a whole different set of values so that we do bring out our humanity and help ensure life. I do think we're coming to, and I'm not going to jump on the 2012 bandwagon. That's not what I'm getting ready to do exactly. But I will say that we're moving toward the galactic center, and there's what you call the photon belt that is aligned there. And I do believe when we talk about energy, astrological or cosmic energies, I do think that we are coming into a period where we might begin to really understand these things a lot better. A lot of people talk about catastrophes that might happen. They may or may not occur, I don't know. But what I do think is that we are on the verge of some type of epiphany. We're on the verge of some type of renewed understanding, whether it comes with the spanking or whether it comes with in some other form. So,
well, I can tell you that while urban dwellers generally are not thinking along the lines of cooperative living, that there are people who are in rural areas who have always and who are increasingly thinking along those lines. When you hear people talk about going green and saving the environment, when you hear people talk about going to the land and getting alternative kinds of housing and lifestyles and so forth and so on, these people see it is impossible not to notice that nature is not pleased with our use of this environment. You don't have to go very far. You can't, if you're trying to watch television, it'll be there. If you're reading a newspaper or a magazine, it'll be there. You cannot help but notice that changes are taking place, climatic changes, and all kinds of other changes are taking place. Now and then some food is banned because it has salmonella, because it's corrupted by some toxic waste or chemical or handling. And so we have to know that these things are not the result of anybody's doing except our own. These things that I may not have personally spilled any oil. But as a friend of mine who is very environment friendly has pointed out, that the demand for petrol has driven all of this behavior, all of this activity comes from the greed of everyday people who don't think that they have anything to do with this, but we do, because we are all part of the decisions that result from my behavior, your behavior, our collective behavior has led us to this. And we want to move to the frequency where these kinds of things are not operable, because that's what you'd have to do. You have to not be on the level of destruction. You have to be on the level of creation if you want to continue. And so if we're satisfied to sit at the level of destruction without making any effort to gain grace and mercy, and also to rise and to elevate ourselves and enlighten ourselves, then we may have to get the spanking.
And it looks like we're getting the spanking. I mean, how many earthquakes have we had recently? I haven't paid attention previous to now in terms of how many major earthquakes happen in a short period of time. But I do know that within the past 5 months, we've had at least 5 major earthquakes.
With
And
hundreds of thousands of people. It's hard to get your mind wrapped around that, because we go to a single funeral, it takes half the day, and we mourn the one person. But to get your mind around a community that is disrupted entirely, that has hundreds of thousands of deceased people in their midst, and that are still facing death and disease from the decomposition and from the lack of clean water or
Yes.
a place to be indoors. Compassion is missing from us, because we have not really ever had the kinds of things that other people in other parts of the world are mourning. We get to mourn one individual at a time, or maybe a few.
you're right. For example, with Haiti right now, there was a lot of hoopla when all of that happened, but these people are still living with the consequences of that earthquake. But I would like to say that a lot of people, what has happened is that a lot of people have given up their ability to think to others that they consider those in control, the powers that be. And the powers that be have been asleep at the wheel, or they've been steering us in the wrong direction. Because I think that certainly we all have the responsibility to learn from our environment and learn from what happens. But I also think there's a certain amount of control that those people who manipulate the planet, they cause certain responses in people, and people tend to pay more attention to entertainment and other kinds of activities without really seriously taking responsibility for their own actions. And I think that if more people, if all of us, including those people who have access to the major media, would change the direction that we change our focus, I think things would change. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yes, I
regarding
am.
that?
Continue.
And I just think that it's a shame that right now the society is gearing our youth, especially, in the direction of consumerism. They are creating consciousness below the belt, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yes, yes.
As opposed to promoting the higher kinds of things. And so it's almost as though you might think that certain individuals don't care that a lot of us may bite the dust, so to speak.
Well, as educators, and we both know that the kind of education that is dispensed in most institutions is consumer education. The purpose of education is go to school so that you can get an education, so that you can get a job, so that you can live the good life.
Right.
And so with that as the goal of education, then when one does not see that this avenue will reach that goal, one will switch avenues.
That's true.
So here we are with an educational system that is gearing young people to get jobs, which, if you have any intelligence at all, which, in some cases you could just call motherwit, if you just had some motherwit, you would have sense enough to know that there is not one job per person in this country, and so that not everyone who goes to school and gets a good education will have a job. So that is not a good reason to be educated. That is not the primary or the best reason to seek an education.
That is so true. That is so true. You're right on point there. And I think what has happened is that some of our young people have connected the dots, and so that's why we live in the age what they're calling the age of mass incarceration. Right now, more people are in prison here in the United States than anywhere else in the world, and many of these people are black and brown. Many of these people were educated in factories where and I once again I value education highly, so I'm not trying to knock the many teachers out there who are doing the best that they can, but the system, the education system, is not gearing our people to to educate, which means to bring
Forth
forth
out of.
right, and they're training people to be consumers and workers. And when you have people who might be intelligent, they realize that this is what's happening, then they seek other means to do this. And that's why I think a lot of them end up slinging drugs on the corner, because they can see that they will certainly make a lot more money doing that than they will staying the course and then graduating and maybe getting a job. And then if you get the job, you're subjected to whatever treatment your bosses have for you,
Whatever working conditions.
working conditions, the whole bit. So some people are seeing through that, and I think that's why a lot of young people, they've just really bought out of the system. They've bought out of the system, but unfortunately, they bought right into a different kind of slavery, because being incarcerated is truly the new slavery in the United States today.
Right. And if one is intelligent, one recognizes what is in one's best interest. And that's one of the marks of intelligence, because you can see the relationships. The relationships are very key to intelligence. When you can see the relationships between things that even seem dissimilar, then you have at least some modicum of intelligence. And so if you cannot see the relationship between your best interests in terms of surviving and developing, and certain kinds of behavior and certain decisions, then you lack intelligence. That is not something that you acquire. Intelligence is not acquired. Intelligence comes with the package. When you are born with a propensity to be developed into an intelligent being. You come from intelligence. It is impossible for you to come from intelligence and possess none of it. Whatever,
Right.
so you come
Right.
from intelligence. What happens is you are dumbed down, okay, as a result of a system that intends to train you to fit into itself, so that
Right.
you will function in a particular way and not in another. And so the misfortune, of course, is that adults with children, or adults who are custodians of children, do not take upon themselves a responsibility to provide life lessons to young people, so that they are not completely dependent upon a curriculum of consumerism.
Right, right. That is so true. That is so true. But part of it has to do that they are victims of the same system,
Of course.
and they, for whatever reason, may not know any better. I think that part of what hinders intelligence also is our appetites, our greed, so that our desires sometimes can keep us from making the best decisions
The 7 deadly sins.
Right,
All of
right,
them. The
right. So,
bad boys.
right, they can sometimes keep us from making the best decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once again, it all goes back to your intent, and it goes back to your integrity and your desire to be a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have that, then we talked about that grace. You will go to a higher level, and things that you can't get WVON on if you're tuned to WGCI.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get
Right.
what's on
The
your channel.
frequency. Yes.
Right, you get what's on
You-
your frequency.
Right.
And one example of how this really works in real life, I know you've experienced a situation where you've had friends or neighbors who were right in your community and you haven't seen them for a long time, and then all of a sudden you start seeing them, you know, almost every day. It's because the frequencies changed and you came in contact. You were actually able to see one another. So there is this invisible frequency kind of thing actually happening, and that's one way to see it. But I do think that it's very important, especially for adults who are working with young people, to teach them these ideas as opposed to what they're learning in schools. And I'm telling you, I come in contact with a lot of young people who've been involved with the criminal justice system, and they're on automatic pilot a lot of times. The gangster rap, you know, and they'll just walk and mindlessly repeat the most misogynistic, degrading kinds of things, you know, without even thinking about it. And we have a hard job, I think, to counteract that, you know, to mitigate that. But I think that it's very important now, more than ever, that we rescue our children.
Absolutely.
That we change the focus, rearrange priorities, and let them see that there are other priorities. There are other ways of being.
And you know, when you said that very often the adults are the victims of the same or not, you don't use victim, because when I used to have Mo Better News and you used to write a column in there, we used to have this debate over this V word. But at least there are people who are the recipients of a lot of this who have been down through the years, adults who have received this education, who are then endorsing it or co-signing it and passing it on to their children. You simply have a responsibility, if you bring people into the world especially, to have something to do about their development. You just do not send your offspring to other people and expect them to do work that you should at least participate in, even if you don't do the work yourself. And you may not know science or math, or you may not know the curriculum, but you know some things about life. You know some things that you learned from your elders. You know some things that you need to be right in there, and your children need to hear the sound of your voice and need to learn to accept you as an authority, because otherwise, when they reach a stage at which the hormones are speaking louder than your voice, then they can't hear you when you are trying to tell them what you should have been telling them all along, and the example that you should have been setting, so that for them to follow, and the environment that you should have provided by having people in your environment, your friends, influence your children.
Yes.
What you do influence your children. You can't just say, don't do what I do what I say.
Do, right.
Children imitate.
That's so true.
If you endorse alcohol, that's just another form of addiction. Don't think that there's something wrong with them if they endorse drugs.
Right.
Because alcohol is a drug as well.
You're absolutely right. You know, that is so true. But one thing that I really do need to say right now, though, regarding our children, is that there are a lot of people who are doing the right things.
Oh, of course.
A lot. They're raising their children right, and there are a lot of young people who are excelling and doing very well in all areas of life. The problem, once again, goes back to what is promoted and what we see. It's very heart-wrenching to note the number of young people that get shot down and that shoot each other and that kill each other.
Daily.
But you see that in the media.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't see are those thousands of others who are not doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times we gear our behavior based on what we see.
Right.
And what we see is sometimes controlled.
Right.
So I'll just say it that way.
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, the media is a major part of the intelligence. See, when the government talks about intelligence, they're not talking about how smart anybody is and what grades they got in school. They're talking about knowing the truth. No matter how often it is obscured and how well it is veiled and hidden, the intelligence includes being able to see through and above and around and under what is presented to you. You can't sit before a TV screen and allow it to define the reality that is in your world and in the worlds of other people, with whom you share space.
Right, right. That is so true. And when you think about some people who just sit their children, their young children, in front of television, and they come away with television consciousness. And television is not telling, they're telling a vision, but they may not be telling the vision
Right.
that they need to hear or
Right.
see, I should say. So intelligence, there was a great leader and teacher, he passed away years ago, but he used to say intelligence was inborn. He used to always say that. And while I agree with that, I do believe that the very fact that we are born, that we are out here in the world, says that we have another opportunity to get it right and to enhance the nature of our intelligence. And once again, it has to do with integrity. If you're sincere about life and living it and want the best for yourself and want the best for your family and want the best for your community, I think that you will eventually find yourself making intelligent decisions.
Right. Someone, I may have read this or someone may have said this, that if you are sincere in your intentions, that whomever, whatever you worship, it will matter less, because the great one will take you by the hand and guide you. If you are seeking truth, if you are seeking the way, that even though you may be confused by all kinds of distractions and all kinds of other things, sincerely, as you say, with integrity, sincerely seeking will bring a guide to you.
Yes. Yes, there's a saying, I know you've heard it, the teacher will appear when the student is ready.
Yeah.
Yes, and with that sincerity, that can rescue a lot of people. I've seen, I know a lot of people, I won't say a lot, but I know several people who, IQ-wise, are not very, they would not be what you would call super intelligent on if you looked at their IQ tests. But in life, with the decisions that they've made, they're living wonderful lives. Wonderful lives that you wouldn't think that someone of that particular intelligence would live, so to
Well,
speak.
I've written on this. The IQ test is invalid. It's culturally biased.
That's true.
It's based on a language, and not even a language. It's based on a lingua franca, a collaboration, a collage, a collection that purports to be a language. It's standardized on a class basis. It cannot be valid. And consequently, when you are measuring, when you're measuring IQ, what I say is you're measuring here in this country, you're measuring EQ. And I call it a European quotient. It is the extent to which you have been
Oh,
exposed
yes, yes,
to
yes.
European culture.
Yes.
And so, the fact that, I even think intelligence is a collective noun like army. It's a plural within a singular because there are so many aspects of intelligence.
Oh,
there
you're
are
right.
so many intelligences.
Right.
And so someone who would dare to sit down and choose a number of things and then develop a test and standardize it on middle class urban white people and then give it to everybody.
Yes.
Many times people who are bilingual or who are not bilingual, who are Latinos, for example, they get thrown into these classes for disabled children, EMH and TMH, because they presume that the children are not intelligent because they can't read the language.
Right.
And then, of course, the language itself. We have so many concepts and so many labels for terms that very often a child taking an intelligence test in my day who would see this particular object would call it an icebox and not know that refrigerator was the proper answer. So the thing is
Slacks versus pants.
absolutely
Couch versus sofa. I mean,
parasol versus umbrella.
right. You're so that's so true. And they measure one limited aspect of intelligence
Absolutely.
that is valued by Western culture that will fit in the corporate structure.
In the consumer education model.
Exactly. Years ago, one of the people I met at my gallery was a very famous bass player. And one of the stories he shared with me was his experience in the Congo. He talked about, he said that during the time that Sputnik went up, which was 1957 or so, in Russia, they put the satellite in space, that when he was in the middle of the bush with the African elders, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have radios
They didn't
or
have
anything.
television.
Right, they had none of that. But yet they knew the exact moment that the satellite was launched, and they knew what nation launched it. And this is something that he told me, and I never forgot that, because there are different kinds of intelligence.
Right.
You take someone who can graduate from Harvard Business School, put them in the jungle for a few minutes, and see how intelligent they are in
Right.
that particular
Because
environment.
they won't understand the relationships.
Right. So this is not to talk down on so-called Western education. Is to point out that there are different ways of being, and that we need to understand that, and we need to think about nourishing our youth and our adults as well, to the point where they can understand all different aspects of intelligence and the possibilities in themselves. I always tell my students, you're really intelligent. You grew your own ears. You grew a nose. I mean, your body knows when it's hungry. I mean, that's a form of intelligence. You know when to eat. Your body knows when to go to sleep. Now, that, believe it or not, is a form of intelligence.
Well, I let all this time go by, and I didn't get a chance to talk about you as an artist.
Oh.
But that is another intelligence. To be able to make something from nothing, to see what does not yet exist, and to bring it into being, to use materials in the environment to reassemble and to create new things. When is your show?
I do have a show that's opening July 2nd at the UIC African American Cultural Center, and it's called Other Times, Other Places. other times other places. And
What
basically,
medium?
I'm using all types of medium. I'm using canvas with painter Sharpies. I'm using a lot of digital. I have a lot of digital pieces, acrylics, and graphics. I do a lot of graphic art because I'm also, you may know, the editorial cartoonist for the Chicago and Gary Crusader newspaper.
And
So
you do those?
I've been doing those since 1980.
Okay.
So
All right.
I use a lot of, I've developed a new kind of collage that I'm working with.
All right.
So, you know, there will be a variety, but they're all going to be kind of otherworldly, so to speak.
Okay. All right.
Basically because I like to think that if we can see the possibilities that might exist elsewhere, it might give us an objective way to look at our lives here. That's why I do that.
Well, I think you're a wonderful person. I'm so glad that I was able to have you for my guest today, and I want you to come back because I didn't really get a chance to talk as much about that aspect of your life as I would have hoped to do.
Oh.
But it's been so good to have you, Yaounde
And
Olu.
I've thank you so much for inviting me. I watch your show all the time anyway when I'm not here, so it's not like I don't feel like a stranger, so to speak.
Well, I want you to know that we now are on ChicagoIPTV.com. It's an internet TV station.
Oh,
So I will be submitting this show so that you will be able to see yourself, and people will be able to see you all over the world.
oh,
That'll
be
isn't
nice.
that a plus? It would
Oh,
be nice.
that's a big plus.
I was offered the opportunity to do that. So it's Chicago IPTV, and I as in I, P as in Paul, TV of course, .com is the internet station that's being started by some friends of mine, and I'm very happy
Oh, okay.
that I'll be able to submit this show, and you'll be able to tell your friends.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
And
I look forward to that.
expect to come to see your art show. It'll be there from July till when?
It'll be there the entire month of July.
From July 2nd throughout the month of July.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And where again?
At the UIC Cultural Center,
Which is at?
it's located 830 South Halsted. I believe that's the exact address, but
Okay.
it's in Adams Hall, UIC, on UIC's campus here
Okay.
in Chicago.
All right.
So I hope everyone gets a chance to see it. It'll be my first one-woman show in a number of years because I used to do this all the time. I've never stopped creating art, but I did